When Ron Platt turned up dead in a fisherman's net, it started the hunt for one of the world's most wanted conmen.
Or was Ron Platt actually still alive? Or was he David Davis? Or was he Albert Walker?
It's a tale of stolen identities, money laundering, gold bars and nappies.
Or actually gold bars and diapers.
We're doing a full recap of CLIs on this episode of So Much Crime,
So Little Time.
You know, Jeff, what we go through in this podcast is a lot about packing to leave, packing to run away, packing to get your baby's nappy bag ready to go to the neighbor's house. But do you know what sometimes is a really good idea I find when you're packing?
What's that?
To take a little break, pull out your phone and go to patreon.com/so much crime, so little time. Because there you'll find early release episodes, bonus content, outtakes, and you'd be able to support our show, which feels like a real feel-good factor in the middle of a kind of tedious task. Join us on patreon.com/so much crime, so little time. Thank you. Welcome to So Much Crime, So Little Time. I'm Dee.
And I'm Jeff. And before we start, just a quick warning.
Warning.
This episode is going to have spoilers for Sea of Lies. We're going to discuss the whole series.
If you haven't listened yet, check out our preview episode on this show. It's the one before this one in your feed.
And we'll also put a link to Sea of Lies in our show notes. All right, Dee, let's
Okay.
do a quick recap of what this show is.
All right. So the show was released in January of 2025. It just finished in March of 2025. The host is Sam Mullins. There are 7 episodes, each in and around 45 minutes long. But what did we uncover in episode 1?
Yeah, so in episode 1, we heard the story of a fisherman and his son who discovered a dead body. They pulled it up kind of by coincidence from the bottom of the ocean, the English Channel. Cops eventually identified the body as Ron J. Platt. Police tracked down...
But how did they identify him?
By his Rolex. The police eventually tracked down a reference that he'd put when he rented his flat as a guy named David Davis. When the police went to go check out Davis at his home, they accidentally went to the neighbor's house where they learned that the person living in that house was not Davis, but actually Platt, which was kind of where we left things with this mystery at the end of episode 1. So, Dee, let's talk about the rest of this series. Where would you like to begin?
I have just a lot of questions for you. But I don't know if we want to jump in. I will say from the outset, one thing I said in the first episode was I wasn't sure about the host. And I just want to jump in and say, look, really loved his voice. I thought he did a good job overall. There were some elements of over narration that I didn't think were needed. Mm-hmm. I think that ran through the entire podcast. But only in parts. Some of it was excellent. But I also, one of the other comments I made in the first episode that I think kind of carried through, they kind of not precipitated throughout them. They were kind of sparsely thrown in throughout the episodes, was the snarky commentary. It always hit weird. It didn't hit well. So there was one comment when he's talking about how Elaine, who was Ron Platt, the real Ron Platt's girlfriend, longtime girlfriend.
Yep.
She was asked to carry cash from England over to Switzerland and change it for David Davis. And she felt uncomfortable. She talked to Ron about it, and Ron basically said, I think it's fine. But the comment was, by this stage, Ron was already the head of the David Davis Appreciation Society. And I'm like, that's really, I didn't love it. And I especially didn't love it because he's talking about someone who is not able to speak for themselves. It kind of minimizes the skill that it takes for a con man to con people, and it makes it look like the victim, in this case, Ron and Elaine, both were victims of David Davis. Obviously to different extremes, but it kind of minimized his status as a victim by saying that.
Yeah, I think it definitely minimizes them. My takeaway, I don't think Sam Mullins is a good host. I'm going to
Oof.
come out strong here. I think he was engaging. I think he has a good voice. I think there were times where I found him entertaining. But for similar reasons to what you said, I found it a little off-putting. And I also think, and this maybe isn't his fault so much as it is the writing. I don't know to what extent he was involved in the writing. I think this story focused on the wrong things throughout.
But before you go into the wrong things, I will say, I was going to say to you before you mentioned the script writing, but like, I thought he was a good host, but there were elements of his style, and whether that was like the script itself or that is just his style, I don't know. We'd have to listen to another one of his podcasts to figure it out. But there was elements of his style I didn't like, but I thought overall, like he did a pretty good job.
Well,
I think it's pretty wild to say someone isn't a good host when you're also saying, oh, but I liked a lot of it, but I didn't like small bits. Like that kind of seems bizarre to me. That's like saying someone isn't a good runner because they sometimes like stop running for a minute and need a break or like fall over or something. They can still run.
Do you want me to explain myself?
That was a really bad analogy.
That was a really bad analogy, yeah.
It was a really bad analogy.
I can explain why I think he was a bad host.
It's like Steph Curry. Okay, you love Steph Curry. He's
Sure.
really good at getting the ball in the hoop, but sometimes he misses. And just because he misses sometimes doesn't mean he's really bad. You know? That's
Okay,
a better analogy.
That's an okay analogy. My point is, though, I think he had this weird mix of being a little bit too flippant and jokey at sometimes seemingly inappropriate times. But then the other side of that spectrum was he was trying to make this out to be this world-altering crime that is like he kept using superlatives and like big flowery language to say like what a big deal this was and how this was, the biggest case that these cops would ever work on, and this was the biggest piece of evidence and the biggest case they'll ever, and I just feel like it was too much bluster for something that like let the case show that and stop blowing it up into something which and this gets to some of the things we mentioned. I think we touched on this in the our preview episode where we talked about how all these things we were talking about, like the gold bars and like the way it was sort of teased. On like I think it talked about like art and gold bars and murder. And yes, there's a murder at the center of the story, but the gold bars were mentioned quickly in passing once and then never again.
And the same with the art.
Yeah, the art too. Where was the art?
The art was when Elaine was working in like an artist gallery or an art gallery, not an artist gallery, an art gallery. But when he first met her.
Yeah, but that felt super
like it wasn't
tangential.
relevant.
Yeah.
No, but it was, yeah.
Yeah, so I think that bothered me because I feel like there is such an interesting story here and there were real victims here. But and I think we got a sense of Elaine, but the other people were the Staley family that we heard about. These are the ones in Ontario who like so we're gonna call him Davis or we're gonna call him Albert Walker. Like what are we gonna call him? It's the same guy.
I think we stick with David Davis.
His actual name is Albert
David Walker? Albert Davis?
Albert David Davis Walker. The guy.
ADDW.
The guy, when he was getting going,
Okay.
he started this whole
We
like,
could call
Ponzi
him
scheme.
Daw. David Davis Albert Walker. Daw. Daw?
I don't know. Oh. Okay. But even in that episode, so this is episode 4 where we're hearing about this Ponzi scheme where he's first getting going. We hear about his wife, Barbara. We hear about, there were a couple things that I know that really bothered me there that gets to this point of Sam Mullins as a host. We heard about how while Albert David Davis Walker was building up this Ponzi scheme and stealing millions of dollars from the Staley family, he was also having an affair with the wife of the reverend at the church, as well as women on his payroll, like who worked for him. And then we heard about how like he ended up getting in the Canadian justice system his fingerprints taken because of a fight he had with Barbara, with who's becoming his ex-wife at the time. And there was a flippant comment made there of how the police decided to arrest him when he was in this argument with his wife, and his wife, or his ex-wife, I guess, pressed charges. And it was treated sort of like as a joke. But this is like a situation of like spousal abuse or potential. Like it seemed like a very serious situation that Sam Mullins treated with as sort of an aside that certainly wasn't focused about the trauma and difficulty that Barbara was going through. I mean, this man was doing all this horrible stuff aside from stealing the millions of dollars. He was cheating on her with multiple women. He would go on to steal basically their 15-year-old daughter and pretend that she was his wife. And I just felt like that was sort of treated as a well, it was both treated too quickly and kind of in a jokey way. And I didn't like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you put it like that, I do think that episode in particular was like pretty bad in terms of that flippancy. I think that like that episode. Yeah, whereas it was kind of smattered throughout the rest of it. I did want to bring up, actually, you're mentioning, like, you know, it's like pipped as like the wildest story and like blah, 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 and this and the other. I agree. I didn't think it was. I thought it was pretty interesting of a story, but like there are quite a few wild stories. There was a few parts to it that were, I think the wildest part to this was Lady Luck. And I feel like they didn't lean into it enough. Like they mentioned it, but like, say for instance, when they noted the name, was it the Lady Jane? Is that what the boat was called?
Yeah.
And they said it was the Lady Jane, and they knew where, like it was somewhere, but they didn't know exactly where it was. And someone walking by was like, oh, I saw a boat in a harbour yesterday called the Lady Jane. The fact that they walked by at that time, the fact that they remembered the boat, the fact that the boat was still there, like this is all like pretty lucky stuff. There was multiple times like how like David Davis or Albert David Davis Walker forgot or didn't take the Rolex off Ron. Like if they hadn't found how the Rolex would likely have like a serial number, ID number, and have followed that. Like there are so many parts to this. If they hadn't, like what do you think would have happened if they knocked on the wrong door or the right door?
I don't fully agree with that. I hear what you're saying. I think there's truth to that. But I also feel like that's just sort of police work. Like some of these things
stumble upon stuff.
No, but
they
there's
usually look for stuff and find it.
But I think there is a fair amount of luck in everyday police work. Some of these things seem like really wild coincidences that they happen to figure these things out. But I don't know. Like he didn't remember to take the Rolex off of Ron Platt when he threw him in the ocean. Okay. We hear about criminals doing wild stuff all the time. I guess to step back from this, I know, but
this guy was so planned out. Like everything was really meticulous.
How often do we hear about perfectly planned crimes, but they do one stupid thing?
No, I know, but like also he was a greedy fecker. Like this isn't like it was a Casio on his wrist. Like it was a Rolex.
We've done almost 100 episodes of this show.
Woo!
On the scale of super boring story to wildest story you've ever heard, I feel like this one was sold as wildest story you've ever heard, but I think it's actually a lot closer to the other end of the spectrum. Because if like what really happened here, this man had some Ponzi schemes, he stole some money from some people, he murdered a guy, which that's a serious crime, but
kidnapped his daughter, pretended his daughter was his wife.
Yeah.
Stole someone's identity, and when they came back, like even him making Elaine and Ron directors of a business, like obviously so that when he gets rid of them, like he owns the business because he is Ron.
And okay, so maybe it is wild. Where would you put this on the spectrum? Like, is this like one of the wildest stories you've heard?
I feel like it's off center. It's not like one of the wildest stories. It's no Pam.
It's no Pam, for sure.
But I agree that I agree that it's not the wildest story I've ever heard. It was there was a lot of pivots in it that I was like, whoa, that's interesting. I probably could have like more or less mapped it out. But I do think Lady Luck, like, if she played a part.
That's fair. I just think I think it would have hit better if if they didn't keep telling me this is so wild.
Yeah, I agree.
If I go to a restaurant and they keep telling me this is the best dish you're ever going to have in your entire life, and then it's really good, but it's like, well, you set the bar a little too high, and it's just not going to hit home. And if they said like, here's your meal, and then it's like, wow, this is actually great. I love this. Like I want to get there myself a little bit. And I don't think this podcast, like from the jump, like from episode 1, the very beginning, it was thrown in your face that this is the craziest thing you're ever going to hear.
Yeah.
Let the story breathe a little bit.
I agree.
And then there are a couple of details I want to talk about that I wish we'd spent more time with. After he takes his daughter, Sheena, she poses as Noelle, his wife. When he gets arrested, they find her in this house and with her 2 small kids. And they talk about how the police go in and they're kind of baffled by like this house is very sparse. There's not a lot of furniture. There's not a lot of things, including like there's no like toys for these kids.
Yeah.
What's the story with these kids? What's the story with this house? I know we got an episode called Sheena that talked a little about her. I know she is trying to live a very private life. So it makes sense that she's not talking to this podcast, and some of the stuff they probably just couldn't know. But like, it really begs the question of what was going on in that house with her. What was her day-to-day life? Where did these kids come from? We don't know. We're never going to know, I don't think.
I mean, I think though, like, I think there's 2 things to talk about here. Like, the first thing is, Sheena was groomed. She came over as a 15-year-old. And I think they are, in a way, treating her as the 15-year-old who left Ontario with her dad. And in terms of trying to keep her identity, trying to keep her decision to say, I will tell you what I have done. It was probably some sort of deal. I will tell you what I have done. I don't want to be involved in this. I don't want to be like prosecuted or whatever. And in terms of the kids, look, she doesn't want to talk about it. And as her being another victim in this story, because nobody can deny that she's not a victim, she doesn't want to talk about it. And she doesn't want her kids to be spoken about. And that was made very clear by both sides. So obviously, Albert David Davis Walker didn't also want to push that, because both the defense and the prosecution decided not to disclose anything in there. And given that, I feel like we can infer, and yet she doesn't want it spoken about. And I'm glad they didn't go into it. I thought it was very respectful for them not to press into that.
Yeah, okay. I agree with that when you put it
like.
That way.
Do you think you'd think any worse of Albert David Davis Walker? He's a creature of a human.
I don't think they made him out to be enough of a monster. And we can drop this, but if he is the father of those children, then I don't think
I don't think that's fair. I don't think we should have that conversation. I think he is a monster enough that he took his daughter away and he pretended his daughter was his wife to numerous people. And his daughter was living in a house that had feck all in it. So were the kids. And I think regardless of parentage, and I don't think we should have that conversation, I think regardless of parentage, he was obviously a controlling shithead.
I guess I don't want him to be as sort of romanticized as he was throughout the rest of this podcast.
Did you think he was romanticized?
Yes.
Oh, I didn't get that at all. Tell me why.
Because I think he's portrayed as this guy who can charm his way out of any situation. For example, when he's arrested and the cops are reflecting on the fact that he basically took over the interrogation, had them do the interrogation like in his cell, which he apparently wanted to happen. When the microphones were, when the recording devices were off, he's chatting him up. They're getting him food that he asked for. Like, he's portrayed as this like charmer throughout. We also hear that.
Yeah, but then he's absolutely crucified in court.
He is,
and
but
he's shook.
But we also heard about how captivating he was, how he was holding, like when he first got on the stand and was being allowed to tell his story, right? When his attorney was questioning him, how he just kind of held the room. And I
feel like you're focusing on the wrong thing here, though, Jeff. Can you choose someone that you've met in your life that sounds a little bit like this guy? They're accurately describing someone. If he was as charming as you feel like he was being made out, say, in the courtroom, the jury wouldn't have taken 2 hours only to convict him on an entirely circumstantial case.
I agree with that. What I'm saying, though, is that the podcast, the host, I think, and this is also, I think, in that general space of the overall tone of the show was too jokey, too light for the seriousness of some of these crimes and for the seriousness of this case. And I think this happens with some of these con men podcasts. I feel like we've talked about this with Price of Paradise, maybe with Filthy Rituals. Sometimes because the story is so absurd, because it's sometimes like comically absurd, some elements of it, that we sort of lose track of the victims, the crimes, the people who are really hurt, and in pursuit of let's all get kind of a laugh out of how ridiculous this is.
I don't think we had that here. And I've been I hated that a lot in previous podcasts, like the two you mentioned. I didn't feel that here. I disagree with your description of that. I think, I don't know, maybe we took different things to it. Like there was the example of when Ron and Elaine were away, I think in London maybe, and they had dinner together, and he was like, "Oh, can I see your room?"
Yeah.
It's a weird thing to say. And he goes into her room and he sits on the bed and he's like asking her to take the money. That entire situation made me feel so uncomfortable. There was nothing endearing or charismatic about that man in that situation. And that was like one of the first, I think that was episode 2.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so I feel like when you have that set up, like that is the type of person we're at. That's what we're describing. When you set that up and that tone up, the charm is like interlaced with creepy vulture predator kind of vibes. And they were saying, like, there's a reason he was able to trick and con so many people. And it is because he was charismatic. It is because he's endearing. It is because he can hold court and he can convince people of things. But when you put that, like, aspect on it and you bring the truth throughout each episode, these, like, kind of more predatory, is that a proper word? Predatorial? Like, this kind of, all the different stories that we're hearing, whether they're small stories, snippets of how he isn't a charismatic person, but he is in fact a predator, that interlacing that taints the whole situation.
I hear what you're saying.
They just didn't need to be as vocal about that. And also, like, why do we need it to be fully serious? Like, I kind of liked a lot of the laughy, jokey things that were happening. I thought it was kind of funny.
I do have a couple of things that I did really like that were on the jokier side. One of them is when we heard that same episode that ended with that super creepy scene in the hotel room. We heard earlier about how Ron and Elaine got together and how they met on a blind date.
Did you know who Cliff Richard was?
No, do you?
Yeah. How do you not know who Cliff... I couldn't... That's one of my questions was like, how did the host not know who Cliff Richard was?
Who is he? I Googled him to see what he looked like. And yeah, he looked like a 1970s or early 80s kind of heartthrob.
Basically.
Is he big in Ireland?
I mean...
This is before you were born.
Yeah. Yeah, he's like 81, Jeff. 84. He was born in 1940. Like my mum and her gals would have swooned over Cliff Richard in his day.
Is he an actor or singer? What is his deal?
Singer. He's just Cliff Richard. Like, I don't really know who else to explain him.
Right after that, I really appreciated that Ron played Paul Simon, actually Simon and Garfunkel's I Am a Rock for Elaine. And I did like Sam's description of how that was like a description of who Ron was, this rock. That was fun. The other thing I wanted to mention was when Sheena is being transported to England to testify, and they stop over in Edmonton for a couple of days, and they're like, what's a fun thing to do in Edmonton? It's like, well, West Ed, the mall, the giant mall in Edmonton. Now, have you been to Edmonton?
No.
Okay, I haven't either. But I looked up this mall because I was curious. And what's funny is if you go to the mall's website, they say they're the largest mall in North America. But if you go to the Wikipedia page, it's actually not as big as the Mall of America in Minnesota, depending on how you're measuring it. If you're measuring it by square feet or you're measuring it by number of stores or occupants. So it has over 800 occupants in this mall.
I wanted to guess.
Oh.
I can't believe you didn't know who Cliff Richard was. Did you think Sheena was going to end up in court?
No. Did you?
No.
When she's in England, she gets to go, her mother comes and gets her to bring her home. She goes to Canada. I thought there's no way she didn't have to go back, testify against her father.
No, I felt like, I know we didn't hear from Sheena in this, but I felt like that, what was your man's name? Sav, or what was
Slade.
The bond that Slade, and the friendship that he kind of maintained with her was, yeah, I found that quite interesting. Kind of like a very caring side and like really trying to look out for her and support her as much as he could until it was the courtroom, which I'd imagine for her was like really hard, because when he was like, I had to stay out because they were afraid if she looked at me, it might look suspect and it might damage the case. Like, I can't imagine from Sheena's part, if she's come in and she's feeling so isolated, etc. Like how it would feel for the one person that you are like really comfortable with and feel like has your back isn't actually in the courtroom.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, I didn't love that, obviously, for her. I hope he flew back with her.
I do. I kind of appreciated hearing that story, just about how that's his job. Like, that's a part of his job. But what a strange job. Like, for a while, he was just like checking in with her over the phone, kind of like maintaining this relationship, kind of keep her kind of engaged with, like, he was just trying to build a rapport with her. It seemed like that was the main part of his job. That then built up to him going to Canada and escorting her on the RAF plane, while also not losing track of her at the mall, I guess, or in her hotel room. But just like, what an unusual job that is, to be like a witness protector. I don't know, chaperone,
supporter.
Yeah, like he's doing his job well if she just feels, well, if she shows up to court, I guess, at the end of the day. But initially, it's really just if she feels like comfortable.
Yeah, I mean, like, some of your job is like giving people an outlet, building like a rapport, and like making sure that they're comfortable talking to you and confiding in you, and that knowing that you're there to support them.
Closing thoughts. What do you think? Was this worth your time?
I think it was worth my time. I enjoyed it more than I didn't enjoy it. I really liked hearing about Sheena, really liked hearing about Elaine, and yeah, I found it intriguing. And I want to go to, what's the name of the cottage that I want to go to? Little London House.
I'm going to say no. I don't think this was worth my time. I don't think this is a podcast I'm going to remember in 3 months.
I think you're wrong.
All right. Well, let's check back in 3 months. I think this could have been, and I don't think this was told in a way that made this
coulda, woulda, shoulda. Indeed. Yeah. I wonder what the listeners think. Please leave a comment, send us a message on Instagram, or email us, whichever you feel good doing. And while you're at it, would you do us a favor and rate us on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcast? 5 stars, please. And don't forget to tell your friends, your family, anyone who has a device.
Next time, Dee, we are going to hear about Amika Moda. She was a young mother, a midwife, and the daughter of a feminist icon. But one night, she caused a fatal crash that separated her from her family and sent her to jail as a criminal. From inside prison, though, She was looking for a way out, and she got the opportunity to join an all-female crew of incarcerated firefighters. So whenever the alarm would sound, they'd go out into the community on fire trucks, and they'd be heroes, even though they spent the rest of their day as prisoners. Every call brings her closer to the chance to reclaim the world she lost. We're going to listen to the 2025 nominee for Best True Crime Podcast in the Ambies. This is a show called Fire Escape from Wondery. That's next time on So Much Crime,
So Little Time.
So Much Crime, So Little Time is a production of Mind Glove Media. The executive producer is Paxton Caloriso. Our associate producer is Blythe Ty. Our theme music was composed by Vyacheslav Starostin. If you haven't done it yet, please subscribe to this show on your podcast app. And don't forget to give us a 5-star rating and a review. Even better, tell your friends. To join the discussion, look for us on social media. Check out the show notes for all the links. Thanks for listening.